Riley never imagined that she would face death or that she would stand before Jesus with all her sins exposed. As a dedicated wife, loving mother, and passionate teacher, she believed that her faith was unshakable. But in a near-death experience, something unexpected happened. A sin that she had justified for years as harmless was revealed in all its gravity. What Jesus showed her shattered her beliefs and set her on a path to true liberation. This testimony will challenge everything you think you know about sin, grace, and redemption. Before we continue with the story, I need to ask you for a quick favor. Did you know that many people who watch the channel's videos aren't subscribed? Subscribing to the channel now not only ensures you have access to content like this, but it can also be an important step in transforming your spiritual life. By subscribing, you won't miss any powerful and transformative messages that can draw you closer to God and guide you toward true freedom. Subscribe now, because I'm sure that God has something amazing in store for you on this channel.
My name is Riley, and at first glance, my life seemed perfect. I lived in Los Angeles, a city of endless opportunities and bright lights. As a teacher, wife, and mother of 2 beautiful children, my days were filled with lesson plans, helping students, and returning home to a loving family. My career was stable, my husband supported me, and my faith seemed as solid as a rock. To anyone on the outside, I had everything: a fulfilling job, a happy home, and a strong relationship with God. I went to church, prayed, and tried to live my best life. I knew I wasn't perfect, but I believed I was on the right path. Yet behind closed doors, there was something more, a part of me that no one knew, a secret that I carried for years, and always treated as irrelevant, harmless, and personal. A habit that I convinced myself made no difference. And yet, deep in my heart, I felt its weight. There were moments of guilt, whispers of shame, but I quickly pushed them away. After all, everyone has their struggles, right? It wasn't hurting anyone. God understood, or did he not? What I didn't realize was how this secret was slowly creating a chasm between me and God, taking root in my heart without me noticing. At first, it seemed like something small, something I could control, but over time, I realized that I always returned to it, as if something was pulling me ever deeper. And no matter how much I prayed or promised to stop, I always ended up giving in again. It was a common day, until everything changed. That morning, I woke up early, prepared the children's snack, and rushed to work. The day was exhausting, teaching, grading tests, answering emails, and dealing with distracted students. I felt drained, but I kept going, just as I always did. When I finally got home, my body was begging for rest. My husband greeted me with a warm hug. The children were playing on the floor, and dinner was already served. It should have been a perfect evening, but something was different. A strange feeling weighed on my chest, a deep fatigue that wasn't just physical. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I just needed a good night's sleep. Later, after putting the children to bed, I followed my usual routine. I brushed my teeth, said a quick prayer, and slid under the covers. But as soon as my head touched the pillow, something strange happened. A weight took over my body, as if I was sinking into the mattress. My eyelids began to close, and for a brief second, I thought I was simply falling asleep. Then, everything went dark. There was no transition, no gradual descent into sleep. It was as if the world around me simply ceased to exist in an instant. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I simply disappeared. I don't know how long I remained in that void. There was no sense of time, sound, sensation, or thought, just an absolute nothingness. I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't awake either. It was an existence completely unlike anything I had ever experienced. And then, something happened. A force pulled me forward. It wasn't painful, but it was irresistible. I tried to fight, to resist, but it was impossible. I was completely powerless. It felt as if my very soul was being torn from my body, as if I were being disconnected from the physical world. A terrifying fear took hold of me. I wanted to wake up, to break free from it, but there was no escape. I was leaving this world, and I knew it. And then, everything changed. I was no longer in my room, nor in my body. I was somewhere else, a place I never imagined being, and before me stood him, Jesus. At first I thought it was a dream, but I soon realized that this was different from any dream I had ever had. There was no smooth transition, no hazy feeling of waking within a daydream. It was as if I had been ripped from reality and placed directly there. I felt weightless, floating in an infinite void, and at the same time, something was pulling me, dragging me forward. I had no control. My instinct screamed for me to wake up, for me to somehow return, but it was futile. Whatever was happening to me was beyond anything I could resist. I wasn't just unconscious. I had been separated from my body. An uncontrollable panic took over me. My thoughts collided, desperate to understand. My heart, if I still had one, was pounding rapidly. My entire being was overwhelmed by a terrifying realization. I was no longer alive. Is that it? Am I dead? The question echoed inside me. I tried to move, to grasp onto something, but there was nothing. No ground, no air, no light, just a dense, infinite void. Then suddenly, everything changed again. The darkness gave way to something unexpected, a profound, overwhelming silence, but different from any silence I had ever felt. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the absence of everything. It was as if I had been ripped from time itself. The entire universe seemed to have stopped. And then, I felt it. A presence. Powerful. Sacred. Impossible to describe. I had never felt anything like it before. Yet, at the same time, something within me immediately knew who it was. An intense glow burst forth before me, dispelling all the darkness in the blink of an eye. But it wasn't a dazzling or cold light. It was a living, radiant, pure light. I could feel it touching every part of my being, not just my skin, but my soul. And then I saw him, Jesus. And there are no human words that can describe what I saw. He wasn't just a presence before me. He was everything. He filled the entire space. And yet, somehow, I knew I was in the presence of someone more real, more tangible, more true than anything I had ever known. His face radiated a light so intense that it was impossible to look directly, but it wasn't just the light that touched me. His eyes, those eyes, they weren't merely looking at me. They were penetrating every part of my being, every thought I had ever had, every secret kept. Every action of my life was exposed before him. I felt completely naked, more so than in any speech or public gathering. There was nowhere to hide. For the first time, I understood the true meaning of being completely known. A wave of fear and conviction washed over me at the same time. I wanted to fall to my knees before him, but I wasn't even sure if I still had knees. It was like standing before a king, small and insignificant, while an indescribable feeling of love enveloped and sustained me. I expected judgment. I thought he would ask why I was there, why my soul was so heavy, yet he said not a word. Instead, he simply looked at me, and in that gaze, something incredible happened. I saw everything. My life unfolded before me, not as distant memories, but as if I were reliving every moment, every decision, every thought. And it wasn't just any vision. It was as if my life were displayed with absolute clarity. I saw the good moments, the times I helped others, when I chose faith over fear, when I was kind, when I showed grace. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Perhaps this isn't so bad, I thought. But then, the vision changed. Gradually, the good moments began to fade, and in their place, I saw my failures. I saw the times when I was impatient, when I ignored the call of the Holy Spirit, when I chose my own desires over obedience. Then, everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze in a single moment. and the weight of an indescribable feeling took hold of me. I knew what was about to be revealed, and no matter how hard I tried to look away, I couldn't. The vision focused on one specific sin, and my body tensed. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to confront that reality, but there was no escape. It was masturbation. The mere thought of that word sent an overwhelming wave of shame crashing over me. Of all the sins I had committed, why this one? I had always seen it as something harmless, private, something that didn't hurt anyone. But before Jesus, the truth was unveiled. This wasn't just a trivial habit. It wasn't an innocent indulgence. It was a chain I had carried for years. Yet Jesus wasn't just showing me what I had done. He was revealing what was happening spiritually. Every time I fell into that temptation, I spun my head in shock, and what I saw made me take a deep breath. A court in the spiritual realm appeared before me. The enemy, the accuser, was there, pointing directly at me. "Look at her," he said, with a sarcastic smile. "She calls herself a follower of Christ, but she chooses this sin instead of choosing you." I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but the accusation was overwhelming. I couldn't deny what was laid bare before God. Every time I justified that act, every time I told myself it was harmless, the enemy used it against me. Each time I gave in to that temptation, I was opening doors for a spiritual attack. The vision drew closer, and I saw what happened after I succumbed to the sin. After each indulgence, there was always a heavy feeling, an oppression that seemed to consume me. I had thought it was just guilt, but now I could see the truth. It was spiritual bondage. Every time I surrendered, I was weakening my relationship with God, building a wall between us, brick by brick. Tears streamed down my face as I witnessed how that sin had allowed spiritual oppression to invade my life. I had always wondered why I felt such anxiety, why my prayers sometimes felt empty, why it sometimes seemed as if God was distant. Now I understood. I had given the enemy a legal claim over my life, and I hadn't even realized it. I felt a deep pain in my chest. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ignored it for so long? I wanted to look away, to try to hide the truth, but the gaze of Jesus held me in place. There was no anger in his eyes, no condemnation. What was there was the purest truth, spoken with love. He wasn't showing me this to hurt me. He was showing me this because he wanted me to be free. And then, he spoke with a softness that cut my heart like a blade. "This should never have had power over you." His words hit me like a shock of reality, exposing the lie I had clung to for so long. You thought it was harmless, but it was robbing you. It was driving you away from me. I cried, the pain of my ignorance crushing my soul. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know it was so serious." He looked at me with so much love, but the truth was clear in his eyes. "You knew," he said softly. "You always knew. That's why. You hid. That's why you felt shame. But you convinced yourself that it didn't matter." I wanted to shatter myself. He was right. I had always felt the guilt, but instead of dealing with it, I hid. I convinced myself that God didn't care about the little things, that he would understand. But there, before Jesus, I realized that there are no small sins. Every act, every thought, every choice matters. Everything defines who we are and who we are becoming. I had chosen something that kept me imprisoned. It was then that I realized that God, in his infinite mercy, had never abandoned me. I had ignored his attempts to warn me, the times when my spirit felt restless, the sermons that touched me, which I ignored, the nights when I felt distant. But instead of asking why, I assumed that God was silent. He was never silent. He was always speaking, but I wasn't listening. The reality crashed over me like a wave. "Oh God, what have I done?" Tears flowed, but at the same time, something new began to grow within me, the understanding of the magnitude of God's grace. Jesus moved even closer, his presence radiating pure love. I expected to hear the words I feared the most. "You have gone too far. There is no hope for you anymore. I cannot help you." But he never said that. Instead, something I never imagined happened. He reached out his hand to me. In a voice both soft and firm, he said, "You don't have to live like this." I looked at his extended hand, my body trembling under the weight of everything I had just seen. I expected rejection, perhaps even anger, but instead, he was offering me freedom. I had spent years struggling with that sin, never imagining that I could be set free. I always thought it was a part of me, something I would have to carry forever. But Jesus was there, telling me that I no longer needed to bear that burden. I looked at that outstretched hand, trembling, my heart racing. I never imagined that after so many years, something so simple could mean so much. He wasn't judging me. He wasn't condemning me. He was offering me freedom. "You don't have to live like this," he said again, but now with more firmness, as if inviting me to take the final step, to choose. I hesitated for a moment, caught between the fear of leaving behind something I had always known and the deep desire to be free. But at that moment, I realized something immense. True freedom did not come from fighting against my nature, but from surrendering control to him, from accepting his grace, from letting go of what I thought was my security. With all my being, I reached out my hand to his, and in the moment I touched it, something indescribable happened. That weight, those chains, those lies that had held me captive for so long, everything shattered. It was as if Jesus were physically taking away from me every burden, every piece of shame, sin, and guilt. I felt a deep relief, a lightness I never knew was possible. For the first time in my life, I was completely free, not just free from a habit, but free from the prison that my own mind had created. I was no longer that person, and with every passing second, it became clearer. The vision around me began to change. The colors grew more vivid, and the space that surrounded me seemed to flow and distort, as if the physical world were dissolving. I saw two versions of my life, as if I were observing two paths, splitting in front of me. On one side, I saw a version of myself, still trapped in the same cycle, years of struggling with the same sin, the same guilt, the same feeling of emptiness. I saw myself distant from God, with dry prayers, my faith weakening, and the inner battle consuming my peace. Deep down, I knew I was imprisoned, but I couldn't break free. On the other side, I saw a version of myself completely transformed. I was free. I saw my soul light, filled with joy and peace. I was walking with God, praying with confidence, living the life I had always desired, free from shame, free from guilt. The difference between these two versions of me was astounding. On one side, there was the pain and weight of a life without freedom, without peace. On the other, the vibrancy and light of a life of true liberation, where I experienced God in a deep and personal way. The vision of my life without the chains of sin, without the burden of guilt, was so vivid, so real, that the truth hit me like a wave. I had the power to choose. The path to freedom lay before me, already open, but I needed to take the step. Jesus had already done the work. The door to freedom was there, but it was up to me to choose to walk through it. I looked at him, still standing before me, his hand outstretched. The choice was clear, but it wasn't easy. For years I had struggled against that sin, never imagining that I could be free, always convincing myself that it was a part of who I was. But now, the truth was undeniable. I had to leave it all behind. I had to let go of the sin, the lies, the habits that held me captive. And with the full weight of that decision, I felt something change inside me. The battle had already been won. Jesus had done everything. All that was left was for me to surrender completely to him, to trust wholly in his grace. With a mix of pain and relief, I finally did what I knew I needed to do. I reached out my hand and took his, with all the faith I had left in me. In the moment our fingers touched, all the weight, all the shame, and the chains I had carried for so long broke apart. It was as if the darkness, the weight, the lies, and the guilt simply vanished. I felt light, truly free for the first time. something within me was restored. For the first time in my life, I felt that I had achieved true freedom. Suddenly, everything around me began to vanish. The radiant light, the vision of the two versions of my life, even the overwhelming presence of Jesus, all faded away as if dissolving into thin air. In the blink of an eye, it was all gone, and I felt my body being pulled back. It wasn't a painful fall, but it was swift, as if my soul were being dragged back into my body in a motion impossible to follow. I felt a chill down my spine and a strong pull, as if I had been somewhere else and was now being brought back to physical reality. When my eyes opened, the world looked so familiar, yet at the same time, different. The room, the bed, the digital clock reading 3:47 a.m. Everything was exactly as I had left it. But I was not the same. I clenched my hands into fists and then let them go. The weight I had carried for so long had disappeared, not only physically, but spiritually. I felt light. The chains of shame, guilt, and spiritual oppression were gone. For the first time, my spirit was free, unbound by the shackles of sin. I had experienced something I never thought possible, true freedom. With a deep sigh, I sat on the bed and ran my hand through my hair, still trying to process what had just happened. There was no longer any space for those temptations, nor for the old feeling of condemnation that used to haunt me. There was nothing, only peace. The mind, once consumed by struggle and doubt, was now calm. The torment of convincing myself that it wasn't important or that I could keep controlling it was gone. I saw everything clearly. For years I had convinced myself that struggle was private and harmless. But now I saw how that lie had kept me captive. The weight of sin had destroyed me, but now I was free. I no longer had to fight it alone. I got out of bed, my legs a little shaky, and stood there for a moment, simply absorbing the new reality I had entered. I had spent years believing that masturbation was something harmless, a personal struggle, something no one else needed to know about. I had convinced myself that it was a private matter, something I could control on my own. But now I saw the truth. It was a prison, a lie that the enemy had planted in my heart and that I had nurtured for so long. And instead of setting me free, it had slowly destroyed me, robbing me of my peace, my connection with God, and the true freedom He offered me. Suddenly I realized something even deeper. God never gave up on me. He was always there, calling, patiently waiting as I sank deeper into that lie. He did not reject me when I failed. He did not abandon me in my worst moments. Even when I closed my eyes to His convictions, He was there, waiting for me to finally surrender what held me captive. It was never about what I deserved, but about what He had already done for me. His grace was always enough, and now it was clear. He didn't want me to simply stop sinning. He wanted me to be truly free. With a heart full of gratitude, I knelt on the floor, my hands trembling. "Thank you, Jesus," I whispered, tears falling as the truth of His grace filled my being. For the first time, I did not feel condemned or lost. I knew that He loved me, and more importantly, I knew that He had set me free. The enemy no longer had control over my life. I had chosen freedom, and with that, my identity had changed as well. The weight of shame and guilt had been torn away, and in its place was the peace, joy, and new hope that only true freedom in Christ can bring. This experience transformed me in ways I never imagined possible. I realized that true freedom doesn't come from making more promises or fighting with all our might to be better. It doesn't come from hiding our struggles and concealing our sin, thinking it doesn't matter. True freedom comes from facing the truth fully, without excuses. It comes from surrender. The things we think are private, the habits we justify as harmless, aren't. Everything we do, every choice we make, either draws us closer to God or pushes us away from Him. There is no neutral ground. For years, I convinced myself that what I did in secret didn't matter. But now, I understand that everything matters. Every decision, every action, every thought. Every opportunity to choose freedom is crucial. I was given a second chance, not because I had done anything to deserve it, but because God's grace is always available. He is always ready to forgive us, always willing to set us free. But for that to happen, we must be willing to accept that grace. I will never take God's grace for granted again. Each day is now an opportunity to live in a new way, to choose the freedom and life that He has for me. I know I may be tempted again, that the enemy will try to deceive me, but now I have something far stronger than before. The truth that Jesus has already won, and He offers me freedom. And now I know I can walk in it because I chose surrender. Now I want to ask you, who is listening to my story? What are you holding on to that is keeping you from living true freedom? Is there something in your life that you've been justifying? Something you tell yourself isn't a big deal? Something you think doesn't affect anyone? Maybe it's the same sin I struggled with, or perhaps it's something different. But deep down, you already know. It's pushing you away from God. I know what it's like to live with a secret burden, to ignore God's conviction, and pretend it doesn't matter. I know what it's like to feel trapped in a cycle, ashamed to admit that something has control over you. But let me tell you something. You don't have to keep living that way. I thought it was too late for me. I believed I would carry this struggle for the rest of my life, that God had already given up on me, but He didn't give up. And if He can set me free, He can set you free too. I need you to understand something very important. Every day you are making a choice. Either you are drawing closer to God, or you are getting trapped in the slavery of sin. There is no middle ground. I learned this the hard way, after spending years convincing myself that what I did in secret wasn't a big deal, because no one knew. I told myself that I wasn't hurting anyone, that God understood. But in reality, it was pushing me away from Him. It was slowly dulling my spiritual sensitivity, keeping me in a cycle of guilt and defeat. And I know you might be doing the same thing right now, convincing yourself that your sin isn't a big deal, but it is distancing you from God without you even realizing it. It's stealing your peace and your ability to live the freedom that Jesus has already won for you. I know what it's like to be deceived, to justify something and think that it isn't causing harm. For a long time, I believed that my sin was a private matter, something that didn't affect anyone, something that God could understand. But deep down, what I couldn't see was how much it was distancing me from God, how it was making me spiritually weak. I was allowing the enemy to use it against me, and I wasn't even aware. But the good news is that this can change. Today, right now, you can make a choice to leave all of that behind. You can choose to live in the freedom that Jesus offers, not because you deserve it, but because He has already done the work. He has already won, and the victory is yours if you want it. I don't know what you're going through or what struggle you're facing, but one thing is for sure. You don't have to fight alone. The enemy loves loneliness. He loves it when we hide, when we try to fight our battles in secret, by ourselves. But you don't have to do that. God is calling you, just as He called me, to live in freedom, to stop justifying sins as if they don't matter. I know what it feels like to think there's no way out, to feel trapped. But I can assure you, if you finally admit the truth and surrender, God will set you free. He doesn't just want you to get better. He wants you to be free, and that freedom is within your reach right now. There's something very important you need to know. Time is passing, and one day, we will all stand before Jesus, as I did. When that moment comes, you won't be able to make excuses. You won't be able to say, I didn't know, or I didn't understand the gravity. The time to make the choice is now. You have the opportunity to leave the weight of sin behind and choose freedom, but you need to make that decision while there's still time. Believe me, when you stand before Jesus, there's no room for justifications. Right now, in this very moment, you can choose to break free from everything that holds you captive. You can take that first step toward the life God has for you. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because the truth needs to be spoken. When you see the freedom that Jesus offers, You can no longer ignore it. I thought I was beyond help, that I had failed so many times. There was no hope for me. But Jesus showed me the truth. He had already done the work. The door to freedom was already open, and He offered me the chance to step through. And He offers that same chance to you today. The choice is yours. You can continue carrying the burden, or you can finally leave it all behind and live in the freedom that Jesus won for you. No matter what you've done, no matter how many times you've fallen, He is calling you to freedom right now. If this message has touched your heart, I want to invite you to act. Don't keep it to yourself. There are people around you who also need to hear this truth. Maybe you know someone who feels trapped, someone who is struggling in silence and needs to know there is hope. Let's not keep this freedom to ourselves. Share what you've learned. Let the world know that it's possible to be free, that it's possible to live in the peace that Jesus offers. I'm not asking you to do this because I need numbers or followers. I'm asking because this message needs to reach more people, and you can be the key to making that happen. Be the voice of hope for someone today. We were not made to fight our battles alone. The struggle against sin, shame, and fear isn't something we should face in isolation. God calls us to be in community, to support one another, to pray for each other, and to be strong together. If you are struggling, don't remain silent. Don't let the enemy convince you that you are alone or that what you're going through is something no one will understand. There is power in confession, and there is power in sharing. When you open up to others, you not only find support, but also strength in prayer and friendship. We are stronger when we walk together, and God uses community to heal, restore, and free. So, if this message has touched you, if you feel that it's time to take that step, I want to encourage you to share your story. It can be in the comments below or with someone close to you. If you need prayer, if you need support, don't hesitate. You are not alone in this. Sometimes, the simple act of talking about what we're facing breaks the hold sin has over us. Don't let fear or shame stop you from seeking help. The enemy wants you to feel isolated, but you were created to live in communion with God and with others. And if you are someone who has been touched by this message, I ask you, share it. What God has done for me, He can do for anyone. Perhaps for years, you have hidden your struggles, believing there was no way out. I felt the same way, but God showed me that with Him, there is no battle without victory. You can be free. I am proof of that. God is calling you to freedom, and all you need to do is take the first step. Don't wait any longer. He is with you. He has already won the victory, and now the choice is yours. Live in the freedom He offers, or continue being trapped in sin. I know that making the decision to turn away from sin and follow God can be frightening. It may seem like a difficult battle, and often our struggles feel larger than our ability to overcome them. But remember, you are not fighting alone. Jesus has already won the greatest battle of all. He has secured freedom for you on the cross. And now, all you need to do is accept that gift. The freedom He offers isn't something you have to earn on your own. It has already been won for you. You just need to take a step of faith, trust in Him, and leave the past behind. Every day, you have the chance to choose to live in the freedom that Jesus offers you. It may be hard, and there will be times when temptation seems too strong. But remember that the strength you need comes from Him. God not only calls you to be free, He also gives you the power to live in that freedom. When you feel tempted to go back, remember God's promises and the victories He has already given you. He hasn't abandoned you, and He never will. The battle doesn't have to be won by you alone. You have the Holy Spirit by your side, equipping you, guiding you, and strengthening you. I want to leave you with one last reflection. The freedom you seek does not come from trying to do more on your own. It comes from accepting what Jesus has already done for you. He doesn't want you to carry the burdens of sin, guilt, or shame. He wants you to be free, but that freedom will only be yours when you choose to accept it. When you do, you'll see that the peace and joy you seek are not found in external things, but in Jesus. He is true freedom, and He is waiting for you. The choice is yours. Walk with Him in freedom, or remain trapped in the enemy's lies. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and think. What are you holding on to that prevents you from living complete freedom in Christ? Is there something in your life that you've been trying to justify? Something that has driven you away from God, yet you convince yourself that it's not a big deal? It might be the same sin I struggled with for so long, or it might be something entirely different. But the truth is that deep down, you know it's keeping you from fulfilling His purpose for you. I know what it's like to live with it hidden, to pretend that it doesn't matter. I know what it's like to be trapped in a cycle of shame and guilt, trying to fight alone. But the truth is, you don't have to continue like this. Not anymore. You already have everything you need to be free. Jesus. He secured your freedom on the cross, and all you have to do is accept that gift. There are no more excuses, no more condemnation. He has already taken on the weight of sin, and now He offers you the chance to live in freedom and peace. But for that to happen, you need to choose. You need to make a decision today, right now, to no longer carry that burden. He doesn't want you to remain imprisoned by the past. He wants you to live for the future He has prepared for you, a future of freedom, peace, and joy in His presence. The choice is right before you. You can continue struggling, justifying yourself, hiding your battles, or you can surrender everything to Him. It may be hard, it may seem impossible, but remember, with Jesus, all things are possible. He has already won the battle for you. Victory has already been secured. All you need to do is accept the truth, take the first step, and trust in Him. He is waiting for you, ready to set you free, ready to give you a new life. The path to freedom is open, and the first step is yours.
If you've made it this far, I want to ask you, what are you going to do now? Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Don't delay the decision to surrender to God and live in the freedom He has already secured for you. The truth is that the life God has for you is far greater than anything you've experienced so far. The freedom, peace, and true joy that only He can offer are waiting for you. But you need to make the decision to come to Him, to let go of sin, to leave behind shame, and to trust completely in His grace. I know it won't be easy. The enemy will try to convince you that it isn't that serious, that you can continue in the same struggle, in the same cycle, but you already know the truth. He wants you to remain trapped, but Jesus has already paid the price for your freedom. What you need to do now is decide with all your heart, with faith, take the step and live in the victory that has already been won for you. And when you do, you will experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. God will give you the strength you need to move forward, and He will never abandon you. If you feel that this is the moment to take that step, I encourage you not to wait any longer. Don't let fear or doubt keep you from living the life God has for you. He has already done everything for you. He loves you unconditionally and offers you true freedom. Only you can make that choice now. Decide to live for Him. Decide to live in freedom, and know that no matter where you've been or what you've done, God's grace is enough to cover you and transform you. Don't waste any more time. The best of your life in Christ is ahead.